Emily wiped her brow, smudging a bit of silver dust across her forehead as she adjusted her work lamp. It was another busy afternoon in her home workshop, where delicate chains and gemstones sparkled under the bright focused light. She had just set the final sapphire into an intricate bracelet design when her phone rang, blaring its ringtone across the room. With a sigh, Emily picked up the phone, squinting at the caller ID. Barbara. Her mother-in-law had a knack for calling at the worst possible times, usually to comment on their lives in ways that left Emily feeling like a child who'd been caught sneaking cookies before dinner. But she had to admit, Barbara's calls were rarely boring. "Hello, Barbara," Emily answered, trying to keep the weariness out of her voice. "Oh, Emily, you won't believe it," Barbara trilled on the other end, her voice bright with an excitement that immediately set Emily on edge. "I just had the best week of my life." Emily blinked, momentarily thrown. That's great." She ventured cautiously, pushing aside her jeweler's loupe to focus on the conversation. Whatever was coming next would need her full attention. "Yes, and I just had to call and thank you for the $30,000. It made all the difference," Barbara continued, her tone positively dripping with self-satisfaction. Silence hung in the air as Emily's brain ground to a halt. Wait, what? She must have misheard. 30,000? What are you talking about? "Oh, you know," Barbara said breezily. "The money I found in your sideboard drawer. I figured it was just sitting there. And with you two living so extravagantly, I thought, why not? So I treated myself to a little vacation. I have to say, that spa in the mountains was heavenly." Emily sat down on the nearest chair, gripping her phone as if it might fly away. "You found what?" She tried to keep her voice steady. "Barbara, there was $30,000 in the sideboard, and you just took it." "Well, it was practically begging to be used," Barbara chirped, her obliviousness almost impressive. "Besides, I knew you wouldn't mind. You two have so much after all." Emily felt her eye twitch. She took a slow breath, reminding herself that losing her temper wouldn't help. "Barbara, that money." "Oh, you can explain it all to me later," Barbara interrupted, clearly uninterested in details. "I'm calling to thank you, not to get a lecture. Anyway, I'll count on you two for future financial help. You know how it is. Toodaloo." Before Emily could utter another word, the call ended, leaving her staring at her phone in stunned silence. Did she really just thank me for stealing $30,000 from us? She mentally replayed the conversation, trying to catch any hint that this was all a misunderstanding. But no, Barbara had taken the money, and with the glee of a child finding candy in a hidden drawer. "Well, that was something," Emily muttered, getting up from her chair. She would have to tell Mark, her husband, when he got home. This was a level of absurdity that she couldn't handle alone. A few hours later, Mark walked through the door, looking pleased with himself. "Hey, babe, I sealed that deal with the new supplier," he announced, setting his briefcase down with a flourish. Emily barely glanced at him. "That's great. Also, your mother stole $30,000 from our sideboard drawer to go on a spa trip." Mark blinked at her, his confident grin freezing halfway. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me." Emily folded her arms, her lips pressing into a thin line. Apparently, we lived so extravagantly that she assumed it was fine to just help herself to the money. So she took a little vacation. She threw in air quotes, adding a sarcastic lilt to her tone. Mark's jaw dropped, and for a second, he looked like a fish gasping for air. "How? Why? I don't even keep money in the sideboard." "That's what I said." Emily flung her hands up in exasperation. But according to Barbara, it was just begging to be used. And she said, "Toodaloo, by the way, who says that when they've just confessed to theft?" "Barbara, obviously," Mark muttered, rubbing his temples as he tried to process the news. "Okay, I'll call her and figure this out." "Oh, please do," Emily replied dryly, "because I cannot wait to hear how she spins this one." Mark dialed his mother's number and put the call on speaker. After a few rings, Barbara answered cheerfully, "Mark, I was just thinking of you, darling." "Hi, Mom," Mark began, his voice strained. "I hear you took some money from our sideboard. $30,000, to be exact." "Took?" "Oh, sweetie, don't make it sound so criminal," Barbara replied, a hint of amusement in her tone. "I was merely borrowing it. Besides, you and Emily always have so much going on. I figured you wouldn't miss it." "Well, we do miss it," Mark shot back, his patience wearing thin. "That money was for—" "Oh, Mark," Barbara interrupted with a sigh, "you're always so serious. Look, I've had a rough year, and that spa trip was essential for my well-being. You wouldn't want your mother to be stressed, would you?" Emily clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a laugh. "Essential for her well-being," she mouthed to Mark, shaking her head. Mark caught Emily's look and couldn't help a small, incredulous smile. He cleared his throat. "Mom, we love you, but you can't just help yourself to our money. It's not okay." "Well, if you're going to be technical about it," Barbara trailed off, and Emily could practically see her rolling her eyes. "Fine, fine, I won't do it again. Happy." "I'll be happy will you give back the money," Mark replied. Barbara gave a small, dismissive chuckle. "Oh, we'll see. Anyway, I've got to run. Pilates class, you know, kisses." The call ended, leaving Emily and Mark standing there, mouths slightly agape. "I don't even know where to start," Mark muttered, sinking into the couch. "She just took it. Like it was nothing." Emily sighed, sitting down beside him. "Well, at least we got a toodaloo and kisses out of it," she said dryly, nudging his shoulder. "That counts for something, right?" Mark snorted, shaking his head. "I guess so. We'll figure this out, one way or another." Emily nodded, already mentally bracing for the next round of their ongoing saga with Barbara. One thing was for certain, life with her mother-in-law was never, ever boring. And as they sat there, a wry smile tugging at the corner of Emily's mouth, they both knew they'd just survived yet another episode of the ever-entertaining Barbara Show. The evening was unusually quiet in the Donovan household, a rare moment where both Emily and Mark were able to unwind after a hectic week of meetings, design revisions, and client negotiations. They had just settled on the couch, dinner trays in their laps, when Emily's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen inside. "Barbara, again," she muttered, shaking her head. Mark looked up from his bowl of pasta, eyebrows raised. "That's the third time this week, isn't it? Let me guess, she's got a new urgent request." "Probably," Emily replied, letting the call go to voicemail. "I love your mom, but she has the timing of a toddler asking for candy in the middle of a supermarket meltdown." Mark chuckled. "You nailed it. But I have a feeling ignoring her isn't going to work this time." He took a bite of his pasta and continued, "We need to talk to her about this money situation. It's getting out of hand." Emily gave a dramatic sigh. "You mean we actually have to confront her and risk the wrath of Queen Barbara?" This is a woman who once filed a formal complaint with a bakery because they ran out of her favorite scones. Mark grinned, then turned serious. "I know, but we have to draw the line somewhere. She thinks we're rolling in money and just waiting for ways to spend it on her whims." "Well," Emily said, setting her tray aside, "no time like the present. Shall we get this over with?" She picked up her phone and handed it to Mark. "Your turn." "I did the last round." Mark groaned but accepted the phone, dialing his mother's number. It rang 3 times before Barbara answered with her usual exuberance. "Mark, darling, I was wondering when you'd call." "Hi, Mom," Mark replied, glancing sideways at Emily, who was pretending to dramatically chomp on an invisible popcorn kernel. "We need to talk about the credit card." Barbara's cheerful tone instantly shifted to one of indignant surprise. "Oh, what now? I already told you that new dress was necessary. The gala is next week, and I simply can't show up in anything less than exquisite." "Mom, you've maxed out the card." "Again," Mark said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "This isn't just about one dress. You've been using it for dinners, spa days, and apparently a month's worth of delivery from the fancy cheesemonger. We can't afford to keep covering these expenses." There was a moment of silence before Barbara huffed dramatically. "I knew this was about money. You and Emily are always living so lavishly, and yet when I ask for a tiny bit of help, suddenly you're in budget crisis mode." Emily couldn't hold back a snort, earning a glare from Mark. She mouthed, "Tiny bit." "Mom," Mark began, trying to stay calm. We're not living lavishly. You see us attending product launches and dinners because it's part of our job. They aren't vacations, they're obligations. Oh, please, Barbara shot back, clearly not buying it. Your obligations just happen to include gourmet meals, exotic locations, and designer outfits. You expect me to believe you don't have a little extra to help your mother look presentable. Emily rolled her eyes, taking the phone from Mark. Barbara, we're not saying we can't help. We're saying we need to manage it. Right now, your spending is, let's say, ambitious. Ambitious. Barbara laughed, a sound that was a mix of delight and mockery. Darling, if I weren't ambitious, I'd still be wearing those dreadful pumps from last season. And you know I simply can't have that. Emily raised an eyebrow and gave Mark a "what can you do" look. Barbara, we're trying to work within limits here. We set up the card so you could get the things you need. But when you go beyond what we can afford... Oh, don't worry. Barbara interjected with a dismissive wave in her voice. I'll be more cautious. Or, well, I'll try. It's just that these stores have such tempting displays. Mark took back the phone, his voice sterner. Mom, we're lowering the credit limit on the card. You need to let us know if you're planning any big purchases. This isn't about denying you things. It's about making sure we're all on the same page financially. There was a heavy pause before Barbara finally replied, her tone laced with sarcasm. Fine, limit the card. I'll just have to find another way to survive this cruel, fashion-starved existence. Mark sighed, rubbing his temple. We're not asking you to survive. Just think before you swipe, okay? Well, I suppose I have no choice, Barbara said with an air of resignation that bordered on melodramatic. But if I show up at the gala looking like a charity case, don't blame me. Oh, believe me, we won't, Emily muttered under her breath, loud enough for Mark to hear. He bit back a laugh and quickly said his goodbyes before hanging up. As soon as the call ended, Emily let out a loud breath. Well, that went better than expected. Did it? Mark asked, collapsing onto the couch. She's probably already plotting her next move. We'll have to keep a close eye on that card. Emily nodded, grabbing her dinner tray again. True, but at least we got her to agree to a limit. Small victories, right? Mark grinned, picking up his fork. Right? Now let's eat before we get another call about some necessary expense. I bet you $10 it's for emergency jewelry cleaning. Emily snorted, shaking her head. Deal. And when she calls, I'll hand you the phone again. Your turn, remember? Mark chuckled, raising his glass. Fair enough. To delicate balances and ambitious shopping lists. Emily clinked her glass against his, a smile playing on her lips. And to surviving another round of the Barbara Budget Chronicles. As they dug into their now slightly cold pasta, they couldn't help but laugh. In the grand scheme of things, their mother-in-law's antics were just another part of the chaos they had come to expect. And somehow, humor made it all a little more bearable. The autumn breeze rustled through the open windows of Emily and Mark's living room as they huddled around their laptops, surrounded by paperwork and half-empty coffee mugs. A week ago, they had received an offer that could transform their business. An overseas expansion was on the horizon, and the possibility had them both exhilarated and terrified. It's perfect timing, Mark said, his eyes gleaming as he scrolled through the contract details on his screen. This partnership could put us on the map internationally. Emily looked up from her laptop, excitement bubbling up inside her. I know. This could change everything. New markets, new clients. It's exactly what we've been working towards. Mark nodded, his mind racing with ideas. But there's one thing we haven't quite handled yet. Emily paused, her smile faltering. She knew exactly what he meant. Barbara. Yup, Mark sighed, leaning back in his chair. You know she's going to lose her mind when we tell her we're moving. She already thinks our lives are some endless vacation. Emily grimaced. Well, no time like the present, right? We have to tell her now so she can process it. Hopefully without booking herself a one-way ticket. Mark laughed. Right, because nothing says business move like dragging my mother along to every board meeting. A couple of hours later, they found themselves sitting across from Barbara in her immaculately decorated living room. Barbara, wearing an eye-wateringly bright floral blouse, sipped her tea with the air of royalty holding court. "So," she said, eyes sparkling with curiosity, "what's this big news you have? New jewelry line? Another launch party?" "Actually," Mark began, choosing his words carefully, "we've been given the opportunity to expand the business overseas. We'll be relocating for a while to set up our new base." Barbara's face froze mid-sip. Slowly, she set her cup down on the table. "Relocating?" she repeated, her tone dangerously calm. "As in moving? As in you moving without me?" Emily shot Mark a glance, and he took a deep breath. "Yes, Mom, moving. For work. It's a fantastic opportunity for the business, but it's not permanent. We'll be coming back." Barbara blinked at them, her expression shifting from shock to what could only be described as wounded disbelief. "So you're telling me you're going to run off to live in luxury overseas and just leave me here?" "It's not luxury," Emily interjected, trying to keep her tone light. "It's work. We'll be busy setting up meetings, managing projects, and handling logistics. It's going to be more late nights at the office than sipping cocktails on the beach." Barbara crossed her arms, a petulant pout forming on her lips. "Well, I should come too then. I could use a change of scenery. Plus, you'll need someone to keep an eye on you too. Make sure you don't spend all your money on useless things." Emily's eyes widened, a hint of laughter bubbling up despite the tension. "Barbara, we'll be working around the clock. It's not exactly going to be a vacation." "Oh, please," Barbara huffed. "I know how these things work. Business meetings in fancy hotels, dinners with executives, shopping in exclusive boutiques. Don't think I don't see what you're up to." Mark couldn't help but laugh. "Mom, you've seen too many movies. It's not going to be like that." "Oh, isn't it?" Barbara arched an eyebrow. "Next, you'll be telling me you're not planning to attend glamorous parties." "Well, there might be one or two," Mark admitted sheepishly, glancing at Emily. "See," Barbara exclaimed, throwing her hands up. "And I can't be the only one stuck here in this dreary town while you two gallivant around the world. It's simply not fair." Emily bit her lip, trying not to laugh. "Okay, how about this?" she said, exchanging a quick look with Mark. "We can't take you with us permanently, but how about a week-long trip? We'll pay for your flight and hotel, and you can visit us while we're there." Barbara's eyes lit up like a child promised candy. "Really? You'll pay for it?" "Yes," Mark said, nodding slowly, already second-guessing their decision. "But just for a week, and you'll need to manage the rest of your expenses." Barbara clapped her hands in delight. "Oh, I knew you wouldn't abandon me. This is going to be wonderful. I'll need a new wardrobe, of course. Nothing too flashy, just a few essentials. Maybe some designer pieces for the climate." Mark rubbed his temples. "Mom, we said we'd cover your flight and hotel. You handle the rest, okay?" Barbara waved a hand dismissively. Yes, of course. But you know how these things go. Sometimes you need a little extra." Emily couldn't hold back a snort of laughter. "Barbara, we're moving for work, not to attend a fashion show." "We'll see," Barbara replied enigmatically, a sly smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. As they left Barbara's house, Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I feel like we just agreed to something we'll regret." Emily patted his back sympathetically. "Hey, at least we bought ourselves some time. She'll be busy planning for her trip while we're setting up shop overseas." "True," Mark muttered, shaking his head. "But you just know she's going to call every day with some emergency expense." "Probably," Emily laughed. "But we'll handle it, one step at a time. After all, this is the Barbara Budget Chronicles, remember?" Mark chuckled. "Right. And what's one more episode in the saga?" He paused, looking over at his wife. "You know, for someone who's not actually starring in a TV show, my mother sure has a flair for the dramatic." Emily grinned. "Well, she keeps things interesting. I'll give her that." As they drove home, a mix of anxiety and excitement filled the car. The overseas move was looming closer, promising new adventures, and undoubtedly new complications. They knew Barbara wouldn't make it easy, but at least they could brace for the inevitable chaos with a sense of humor. They had a journey ahead of them, and Barbara. whether they liked it or not, was going to be part of the plot. With their move overseas rapidly approaching, Emily and Mark had dived into a whirlwind of packing, organizing, and sorting out last-minute business arrangements. It seemed like every day brought a new task, and amidst the chaos, they had almost managed to forget about Barbara's constant demands. Almost. "Hey, did you see this month's credit card statement?" Mark called out from the study, holding a stack of bills in his hand. He stared at the pages, his eyes scanning line after line of charges with growing disbelief. Emily poked her head through the doorway, a roll of packing tape in one hand. "Nope, too busy packing for our exotic vacation," she said with a smirk. "Let me guess. Barbara went on a shopping spree for essentials?" Mark let out a dry laugh. "Oh, you're not even close. We've got spa visits, designer dresses, and wait for it, $800 on the Wine Cellar Club." Emily's eyes widened. The Wine Cellar Club. Since when did Barbara become a sommelier? Mark tossed the bill onto the desk, running his hands through his hair in frustration. Since never. She probably just thought it would be fun to try something new. Emily sighed, setting down the packing tape. "All right, I think it's time to lower her credit limit. She clearly thinks we're the bank of unlimited spending." "Agreed." Mark nodded, already dialing the credit card company. "She's going to be thrilled when she finds out." After a few minutes of discussing the new limit with the credit card representative, Mark hung up and sighed in relief. "Done. I gave her enough for essentials and emergencies. Let's hope this teaches her to manage her spending." Emily laughed. "Oh, you sweet, naive man. Have you met your mother?" As if on cue, the front door swung open, and Barbara marched into the room, her face flushed with indignation. "Mark, Emily," she barked, clutching a bright pink shopping bag. "Do you have any idea what happened to me at the store today?" Emily glanced at Mark with a barely hidden smirk. "I have a hunch," she muttered under her breath. Barbara stormed over, planting herself in front of them. "I couldn't pay for my shopping." The card was declined. In front of everyone. She looked genuinely horrified, as if she had just been told the world had run out of chocolate. Mark took a deep breath, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. "Mom, we lowered the limit on your card," he explained calmly. "You've been overspending, and we can't keep covering for all these extra expenses." Barbara blinked, her mouth dropping open in shock. "Overspending? I'm merely trying to keep up appearances. You both go to all these glamorous events, and I'm expected to look like a pauper." Emily tried to keep her expression neutral, but couldn't resist a little jab. "Barbara, you're not exactly hitting the runway. We're talking grocery shopping and, apparently, a wine club." Barbara held up her hand, silencing them with a dramatic wave. "That wine club was for research," she declared. "I wanted to explore a new hobby. But more importantly," she turned to Mark, her eyes narrowing, "how can you justify gallivanting off to luxury parties while leaving me with a credit limit? It's absurd." "Mom," Mark started, his patience visibly fraying. "Our luxury parties are business events. We attend them because we have to network and build relationships for the company. It's not a vacation." Barbara sniffed, crossing her arms. "That's what you say. But I see the photos. Fancy suits, beautiful dresses, champagne. Hardly seems like work to me." Emily chimed in, her voice light but firm. "Trust me, Barbara, spending hours pretending to laugh at bad jokes while balancing hors d'oeuvres on tiny plates is definitely work." Mark shot her a grateful glance, then turned back to his mother. "Look, we're not saying you can't enjoy yourself. We just need to stick to a budget. We're moving soon, and there's a lot of expenses we have to manage." "Moving," Barbara muttered, clearly unimpressed. "More like escaping to your European wonderland." "Right," Mark deadpanned, "because juggling multiple time zones and setting up international accounts sounds exactly like a vacation." Barbara let out a theatrical sigh, glancing at her shopping bag. "Fine. I'll try to be more reasonable." She conceded with a tone that suggested this was an enormous personal sacrifice. "But just so you know, this matching bag and hat set was on sale." Emily couldn't help it. She burst out laughing. "Oh well, in that case, it's practically a financial decision." Mark bit back a smile, shaking his head. All right, Mom. We'll work with you on the budget, but you need to stick to it. Otherwise, the card is going to get canceled, and you'll have to manage with cash. Barbara's eyes widened in horror. Cash? Do you expect me to carry cash like some common tourist? Mom, it's not that bad, Mark said, his tone both amused and exasperated. Besides, sometimes being common helps you keep things in perspective. Barbara sniffed again, standing up straighter. Perspective? Fine. I suppose I can endure this trial for the sake of family. Emily and Mark watched as she swept out of the room, shopping bag swinging in her grip like a victory flag. As soon as she was out of earshot, Emily turned to Mark, grinning. So, she said, folding her arms, how long do you think this trial will last? Mark laughed, rubbing his forehead. 2 days, tops. Then we'll get a call about an emergency sale on cashmere scarves. Yup, Emily agreed, nodding sagely. And when she calls, I'll let you handle it, because I'll be too busy sipping champagne at our European wonderland. Mark snorted. Deal. And I'll be networking my way through another meeting. Here's hoping they serve good hors d'oeuvres. They both chuckled, letting the laughter ease the tension of the situation. Managing Barbara's spending was going to be a challenge, but at least they could face it with a sense of humor. As Emily picked up the packing tape and continued sealing up boxes, she smiled to herself. They might not be able to control everything Barbara did, but they could handle each absurdity as it came. After all, it wasn't the first time they'd had to navigate the twists and turns of the Barbara Budget Chronicles, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. With the credit limit set and a new plan in place, they were ready to move forward, even if it meant bracing for the next round of Barbara's shopping extravaganzas. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a fortress of half-packed boxes. The sound of tape ripping filled the room as she sealed another box, her mind ticking through the never-ending to-do list for their overseas move. Outside, autumn leaves drifted past the window, a reminder of the changes ahead. She glanced at the clock inside. Mark would be back soon, and they still hadn't heard from Barbara since the whole credit limit fiasco. Just as she was pondering how peaceful things had been, almost too peaceful, the phone rang. Emily raised an eyebrow as the familiar caller ID flashed across the screen. Barbara. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was likely to be another demand. Hey, Barbara, Emily answered, attempting to sound cheerful. What's up? Oh, Emily. Barbara's voice came through, fraught with distress. It's terrible. Absolutely dreadful. You must come over immediately. Emily's heart skipped a beat, alarmed by the dramatic tone. What happened? Is everything okay? No, nothing's okay. They're asking for payments every day. It's too much. Barbara wailed. I don't know what to do, and Mark isn't answering my calls. You're my only hope. Emily closed her eyes, willing herself to remain calm. Okay, slow down. Who's asking for payments? The banks, Barbara replied, practically spitting out the word. They're demanding money left and right, and I can't keep up. Emily pinched the bridge of her nose, a headache already forming. She had suspected this was coming. Barbara, have you tried talking to Mark about this? I have. Barbara cried, but he blocked my calls. Can you believe it? My own son. Her voice rose in pitch, a clear indication of the dramatic performance underway. You need to talk to him, Emily. He's being so unreasonable. Unreasonable, Emily echoed, glancing around the room at the sea of boxes that marked their impending move. Okay, let me talk to him when he gets back, but no promises. We're stretched thin with the move and the business expansion. Oh, so that's more important than helping your poor mother-in-law. Barbara shot back, her tone shifting to one of aggrieved martyrdom. I suppose I should just sell the house then. Is that what you're saying? Emily froze, her eyes going wide. Wait, what? Sell the house? Yes, Barbara exclaimed, her voice wavering between exasperation and defiance. What else am I supposed to do? The banks want their money, and if Mark won't help, I have no other choice. Emily was at a loss for words. Barbara, selling the house is a huge decision. Can you just? But Barbara had already hung up, leaving Emily holding the phone in stunned silence. She stared at the screen for a moment before slumping back against the couch. Great, just great. A few hours later, Mark returned home, looking more exhausted than ever. What happened? He asked, catching sight of Emily's worried expression. Emily sighed. Barbara called. She's apparently in debt up to her ears and said something about selling the house to pay it off. Mark's eyes widened in shock. She's what? Yeah, Emily replied, her voice laced with exasperation. Apparently, she's had it with the banks demanding payments and, the concept of financial responsibility in general. Mark ran a hand through his hair, sinking into the nearest chair. I can't believe it's come to this. Believe it, Emily muttered. She's convinced we're abandoning her to live in luxury abroad. And now she thinks selling the house is her only option. Mark shook his head, a grim look crossing his face. That house is everything. It's where I grew up. And she's just going to, what? Sell it like it's last season's wardrobe. Emily reached out and put a hand on his arm. I know it's hard, but we can't change her decisions. You've done everything you could to help her. She has to deal with the consequences now. Mark let out a bitter laugh. You know what the worst part is? She'll act like she's the victim in all this. Like we forced her to sell the house because we won't finance her shopping sprees anymore. Oh, she's definitely going to spin it that way, Emily replied with a dry smile. You know Barbara. She could sell a story better than a used car dealer on commission. Mark slumped back in the chair, rubbing his face with both hands. So what do we do? Bail her out again? Emily thought for a moment, then shook her head. No, she needs to learn that actions have consequences. We can't keep throwing money at her problems. It's not sustainable, for us or her. As if to punctuate her statement, the phone rang again. Emily and Mark exchanged a weary glance before Mark picked it up, putting it on speaker. Hello, Mom, Mark said, bracing himself. Oh, Mark, thank goodness. Barbara cried, her voice cracking with distress. I'm so glad you picked up. I've sold the house, but it's not enough. I can't pay off everything, and now I'll be left with nothing. Mark sighed, closing his eyes for a moment before speaking. Mom, we've been telling you for months that you need to be more careful with your spending. This isn't something we can fix overnight. Well, if you had just given me a little more support, Barbara started, but Mark cut her off. We did support you, he said firmly. We gave you a credit card. We set limits. We tried to help you manage your finances. But you kept spending beyond your means. Selling the house was your decision. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Emily thought Barbara might finally accept some responsibility. Then, Barbara sniffed loudly, launching into a tirade. So that's it, is it? You're just going to watch your own mother suffer in a shabby apartment while you live the high life overseas. Mark pinched the bridge of his nose. Mom, this isn't about us living a high life. We're moving to work, to build our business, and you need to start making better choices with your finances. Barbara gasped, clearly offended. Better choices? I am making choices. I chose to live well, to enjoy life. You two just don't understand the pressures of my situation. Emily couldn't help it. She burst out laughing. Oh, we understand perfectly, Barbara. We've been living in the Barbara Budget Chronicles for years now. Mark bit back a smile, but his voice remained stern. Look, Mom, you're going to have to figure this out. We can't help you this time. Well, Barbara sniffed, her voice icy. I see how it is. Enjoy your glamorous life abroad, and don't worry about me. I'll manage somehow. The call ended with a dramatic click, and Mark set the phone down with a sigh. Well, that went about as well as expected. Emily nodded, crossing her arms. Yup, she's probably already rehearsing her lines for the I'm being abandoned narrative. Mark shook his head, a sad smile tugging at his lips. I thought moving abroad would be a clean slate for us, but I guess some things you just can't escape. Nope, Emily replied, picking up the roll of packing tape and waving it dramatically. But you can at least try to pack up the chaos in a box and ship it somewhere else. Mark laughed, the tension in his shoulders easing just a bit. Yeah, maybe. But let's make sure it's labeled fragile, just in case it blows up again. With that, they continued packing, knowing that Barbara's antics would continue to be a part of their lives no matter how far they moved. But at least for now, they were one step closer to their new beginning, bruises, lessons, and all. The road ahead might not be easy, but they had learned to face it together, ready for whatever surprises Barbara might throw their way next. And with a bit of humor and a lot of tape, they felt a little more prepared for whatever came next in the ongoing saga of their lives.